Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Ron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we are going to be continuing What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee, My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit, Part 6. As always, if you're a fan of the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Also, if you haven't, please check out our earlier uploads from in the week. Yesterday we did What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange, Naruto Mystic Adventures Part 6, and on Monday we concluded What If Issei Was the Shield Hero, High School DxD, Dragon's Rage, Season 2 Part 3, the Season 2 finale. As we get into today's video, if you haven't, please check out our earlier videos for this series so you can be caught up on everything that is What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee, so that you can stay in tune with the story as we get into the next part. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Following their fight with the hero killer, for Ida, Izuku, and Todoroki, they would soon return back to their work studies and finish them out. Once their week was over, they would thank each of their senseis before returning back to class. From there, the rest of the first semester would continue on until eventually their end of term would be coming place. Everyone was a bit nervous, but also excited. They were finally reaching closer to the end of the year, and it seemed as though it was time to take things to the next level. Of course, while many students were looking forward to the final exam test, there were others who were very nervous for more practical reasons. Those who had to admit that they hadn't been studying as much as they should have been, and sometimes they forgot that when it came to being a hero, there was more to it than just the glorifying hero work. As for Izuku and Todoroki, they had to focus on their own training in the meantime. When Izuku had made it back home, he told his parents about everything that happened, including his fight with the hero killer. Of course, Lee and Inko were a bit worried about their son, after all, to face someone as dangerous as the hero killer. Although thankfully no one got hurt, it was still a worry, especially for Inko. She always knew that her son and that her husband were very strong and capable fighters, and she didn't doubt that they could take care of themselves. But as a loving wife and as a worried mother, even being a hero herself, these were always the things that concerned her. It wasn't that she didn't have faith in them, but it was just a natural worrying that any loving person would have for their family. As for Lee, he was proud to see that his son was taking the next steps in his training to become a hero. And even more so was that he was gaining more control of the inner gates, going up to the point where he had already mastered 3 of them. Of course, he was thinking about teaching him to the 4th gate, but he wasn't sure when would be the best time. He knew that the final exam for the first semester was going to be coming up, so he figured that maybe they could squeeze in some training then. Of course, for each gate that Izuku unlocked, it increased a new level of power for him, but it also meant they had to regulate and keep that power under control. If he didn't learn how to harness it and use it correctly, he could find himself in a situation where he could end up doing more damage to himself than anyone else in the meantime. However, there was one student who was agitated with almost everything and everyone around him, and his name was Katsuki Bakugo. It hadn't been lost on him that during the events of the sports festival, both Todoroki and Izuku had taken themselves out before he had a chance to face either of them in the finals. For that, he felt as though there was a stain on his championship, believing that he truly didn't win it or earn it the way that he wanted to. And then, to make matters worse, it seemed as though those two nerds were conspiring or something, always talking with All Might all the time in secret and keeping everything hush-hush. While he felt as though he were growing stagnant in his training, they seemed to be going stronger, and he wanted to find out the truth behind it. One afternoon, as Izuku and Todoroki were heading to All Might's office, the three would make their way inside and have some tea, discussing how their training was going in the meantime. Todoroki had managed to get up to 15% of One for All. All Might was very impressed with this, as he didn't expect that Todoroki would be able to get acclimated with the power so quickly. Although for Todoroki, he would explain that it felt as though he were just adding a third quirk to his arsenal. After all, you could say that even for his own quirk, half hot, half cold, it was essentially 2 for 1. Now, it was more of a 3 for 1 in this case. But Izuku looked at it in a much different way. He didn't really think that One for All was a third quirk in and of itself, more so than it was a quirk amplifier. When you really stopped and thought about it, it amplified one's base or natural power. Of course, in the case of All Might, who was technically quirkless when he got the quirk, it only increased his overall physical strength and durability, making him a much more stronger and capable human. So in a way, it amplified what All Might already was, which unfortunately was a quirkless human. But for Todoroki, he already had a quirk in half hot and half cold, and he had been training in it diligently for years now. So in a sense, he was already at a good starting point to amplify his power. All Might agreed, but he would tell Todoroki to be a little careful though. If he went too far and the quirk amplified his power, it could amplify his weaknesses as well, meaning he might overfreeze or he might overheat rather quickly. So that was something that he needed to keep in mind going forward with his training. He would also tell them that special provisions were being made this year for the final exam, and that the two boys needed to be prepared at all times. Everything was going well as they were preparing to leave. As Izuku and Todoroki were talking amongst themselves, they would be stopped when Bakugo would talk to them. "Hey nerds, just what was that all about?" "Oh, Kachan, can it, Deku? Don't even bother lying to me. I want to know the truth. What the hell are you two up to with All Might?" I don't know what you're talking about, Bakugo. We're not really up to... Can it, Icy Hot? I already know what's going on here. You guys have been running off secretly doing your rendezvous with All Might all the time, and now you're getting incredibly stronger because of it. Well, I want in. I want to know what's going on here. But I don't think you... It has something to do with your quirks, doesn't it? And how could you tell? It doesn't take that much brain to think about it. All Might doesn't get around as much as he used to. That much is a fact. I know he's still powerful and the #1 hero and all that junk, but even I can tell when the man is trying to hide his limits. And now you two are in the mix. If I had to take a wild guess, I would assume that he's trying to find a successor, am I wrong? Both Izuku and Todoroki would be shocked by this. It didn't seem as though he knew all about One for All, but he was coming pretty close. It was only a matter of time until he figured it out, but what were they going to do in the meantime? Could they afford to tell him? Did they really have to tell him? Both Izuku and Todoroki would look at one another. They both knew that it was better off if they told him, since at the very least he would be better off at keeping it a secret than anyone else. They would nod and they would tell Bakugo to follow them somewhere. Bakugo agreed, and they all walked to a secluded area, to the forest side of UA. When they were all alone, they sat under a tree with one another, and they would explain everything. They would tell Bakugo about One For All, and how All Might had chose either of them to be the candidate for the power. Of course, to Bakugo's surprise, Izuku had actually been offered this a long time ago, but he turned it down, since he was in favor of earning power his own way, training like his father did to become incredibly strong, believing that instead of using One For All, he would use it as a measuring stick, essentially making it its rival as a whole. As for Todoroki, he accepted because he felt it was his duty to do so, his responsibility. There wasn't anyone else that was going to take on the power, so he figured he might be the one. Bakugo would be absolutely amazed at this, although his pride would be wounded a bit more to learn that he wasn't considered for the power. But then the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't want that stupid power in the first place. He was going to get strong, just like Deku was, and he was going to surpass the power of One For All. Now that he felt as though he had a goal, something to aim towards, he would agree to keep their secret, on the condition that he wanted in on their training. He wanted to get just as strong. He made it his goal that he was going to surpass One For All on his own, with his own power. And then, he was going to surpass Deku as well. Even if Deku didn't have to use that quirk, he knew that he was still strong enough on his own, and he wanted to surpass even his power. The three boys would get up and agree, noting that they were all going to get stronger together, and from there, the reluctant trio would be formed. Not too long after, the time would come for the final exam. Most of the students thought that they already knew what this was going to be. They thought that they were going to have to face those robots that they fought during their entrance exam long ago. And under normal circumstances, that would be the case. However, Mr. Aizawa would tell them that they were going to be changing the curriculum this time around. The students were not going to be fighting against robots. Instead, Principal Nezu would appear from out of Mr. Aizawa's scarf, and he would reveal to Class 1A that they were going to be having battle simulations not against the robots, but against the teachers. This caused many of the students to become very alarmed and concerned. They knew better than to try to challenge their superiors. Even on their best day, they didn't think that they had what it took. However, the teachers would assure them that they were going to make it as fair as possible. The point of the fight was to simulate and see if they could work together, and to see if they had improved in what they had learned. The students were going to be paired off and they were going to face one teacher. The teachers would be wearing special handcuffs that would restrain their powers. That way the students would have a fighting chance. There would be a time limit, and the students would have to do one of two things. They would either have to capture the teacher in wrapping tape, which would signify catching the criminal and giving them the win, or they would have to escape the area. They would have a certain time limit to do so, and if they could only get one or the other, then they would pass. Meaning, if just one student could escape, they passed in victory. If they couldn't achieve either of these goals, then they would be failed. This had everyone on their guard at all times. However, when the students looked at the pairings, they knew they had an even number of kids, so they assumed that the pairings were all going to be 2-on-1. However, a special provision had been made. There was going to be 2 3-man teams, so it was going to be 3-on-1 for 2 of the tests. And for one of them, it was going to be Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki. And those 3 were going to be going 1-on-1 with All Might. The 3 young heroes would all look at one another nervously. They had kind of figured that this was going to happen, seeing as how all of them were connected in some way, shape, or form. But to think that they were going to be going up against the symbol of peace himself, against All Might. The other matches would all take place one at a time, until eventually it came turn for Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki. They would make their way to the site for where they would be holding their exam. It would be in a building district. As they made their way, the countdown timer would begin with 20 minutes. As the three heroes walked together side by side, Bakugo walking in first, as he felt as though now he were going to get a chance to show what he could do, and that he wanted to see what they had as well. Both Izuku and Todoroki would look at one another nervously. As they had made their way to the center of the city, once it was time for them to begin, they waited, because they knew it wouldn't be long. From out of nowhere, there would be a great gust of wind, and standing just 20 feet across from them, towering even as high as the buildings themselves in their minds, was none other than All Might. He had a wicked grin on his face, and he seemed as though he were raring to go. Both Izuku and Todoroki wanted to come up with a strategy, but before they even had a chance to, Bakugo would already go running in. He would use the stun grenade against All Might, believing he could distract him long enough to go in for the charge. However, All Might wouldn't even be fazed, grabbing Bakugo by the face and slamming him into the ground itself. Even then though, Bakugo would refuse to give up. Even while on the ground, he would launch a flurry of explosion towards All Might, surprising him, and it actually stung a little. With no choice, the other two boys would have to jump into the fray at once. Izuku, opening the first gate, would go in for the Leaf Hurricane. However, All Might would block it with his left arm, telling him that he had fought his father many times before in the past, and he kind of expected that little trick coming. However, what he didn't expect coming was a jagged edge of ice launching straight towards him and hitting him in the chest. He would get up, coughing a little, telling Todoroki that that was a nice attack. He would have expected fire since he had also done training with Endeavor before, but he had never gone up against an ice user of this caliber, and he was looking forward to seeing what they could do. As the three boys would regroup, they would decide to go in for an all-out flurry and assault. The other students watching on in amazement, seeing these three prodigy-like heroes all doing battle against All Might. However, they soon began to realize that there was a reason why All Might was the #1 hero, why he had been on top for so long. The boys seemed to be giving it their all, but for All Might, this was just a regular Tuesday for him. He didn't even seem to be breaking a sweat. He was able to block and counter every one of their attacks, sending them all flying in different directions. Slowly but surely, the boy's confidence began to drain. Even Bakugo began to cower a bit, as All Might began to stalk him. This was his chance to see what true power really was, what he was aiming to become. And this was an All Might who had been training for decades to get where he was. He felt as though he were trying to scale himself to a complete and utter monster. He didn't know if he stood a chance. However, before Bakugo could be stayed weakened in his own sense of struggle and fear, Izuku would kick things up to the next level. At the last second, he would open the second gate, bypassing All Might's defenses at the last moment for a roundhouse kick to the face, sending him flying into a building not too far away, as he would pick up Bakugo and he would go running with Todoroki, who would create massive walls of ice to create a bit of a maze or a labyrinth in order to hide them, while they went hiding in a back alley. The three boys catching their breath, Bakugo would ask Todoroki just how much power he was using, and he would tell him he was only using about 15%. Bakugo would look at him in amazement. He was using 15% of All Might's power, and that wasn't enough? They explained to Bakugo a little bit about how One For All worked, and how technically, All Might was only running on the embers of the power, since it had been transferred to Todoroki. This only made them all feel even worse. If they were being right here, it meant that All Might's power was nothing more but fumes. A power, or a flame if you will, that could go out at any time. The fact that if it could be something that would be considered that weak, and yet he was still that strong, they didn't even want to imagine what he would be like if he still had the quirk at his full disposal. He would be an absolute and utter unstoppable force. There wouldn't even be anything that they could do to make a scratch. While Bakugo didn't want to admit it, they were lucky that Todoroki had gotten the power. Otherwise, they wouldn't stand a chance. Izuku would try to tell Bakugo that they needed to come up with a plan, but Bakugo would simply scoff and brush him off, telling him that he already knew that they were going to need a plan. But what they were going to do, though, he wasn't entirely sure. He wanted to stand his ground and fight no matter what, and the others felt the same. They decided that if they could create an opening, and maybe if they could go all out and hit him where it hurts, then maybe, just maybe, they might stand a chance. All Might would make his way through the icy labyrinth, being able to rush and move through the different passages a lot more smooth and clearly, although eventually he just decided to use his power to break away all of the ice, causing it to shatter and fall all around him. He couldn't seem to find the boys anywhere, but he could tell that they weren't making a run towards the exit, so it was obvious that they were hiding. Although, what was their next plan going to be? What was going to be their next attack? That was when Izuku would appear behind All Might. He would use the dancing leaf shadow to stay out of his line of sight. However, All Might would be able to sense his presence, and he would go barreling in with a kick of his own. However, Deku would open the third gate, and he would use all of his strength to catch his kick, even though he could feel when it slammed into his side that he definitely might have broken one rib or so. All the same, he would grab him by the leg and lift him into the air before slamming him into the ground. As he did so, Bakugo would come rocketing in from high above, both of his grenade gauntlets pressed in front of him, as he was about to use Compression Impact, sending a strong force straight into All Might's chest. All Might would cough up a little bit of blood, but he would easily swat both of the boys away. However, that was when a shining light of blue and red would come flying towards him. It was Todoroki, channeling all 15% of One For All, and he was ready to use his signature attack, the attack that he had used at the sports festival, now only increased with more power. He would take his hands and he would clasp them together, as he would press them straight towards All Might's back as he got back up, as he yelled, "Flash Freeze!" From there, a great compressive burst of energy would go flying directly into All Might, shooting him almost 50 feet and crashing into another building. The boys would then get up to see what they had done. They had managed to send All Might flying. After that, Todoroki would create a great wall of ice, making it as large and as dense as it could be, as he yelled for the other two to run. With no choice, Bakugo would grab Izuku by the collar. Using one of his gauntlets, he would pull out the pin, saving his largest explosion that he had left. He would then rocket and shoot them straight towards the exit, which was only 50 feet away. They would then be sent flying, as Todoroki continued up the ice wall to try to hold back All Might. As All Might quickly recovered, he would see the wall in front of him, and he would channel the vestiges of One For All inside of him, as he started to punch away at the ice that continued to form. It was going to be a battle of endurance. Who was going to run out of power and stamina first? Todoroki continuing to keep the wall of ice up, and All Might like a jackhammer continuing to break through. They seemed to stalemate with one another for a bit, but eventually, the number one hero would prevail, eventually making it through in front of Todoroki. You did very well, young Shoto. But now, I will show you why I am the number one hero. He would grab Todoroki by the face. Todoroki, using his flaming side, would go in for one final strike, blasting All Might point blank with everything he had, only to leave himself absolutely drained and tired. All Might had taken some damage from that attack, but all the same he was able to stand back up, and Todoroki was down for the count. The explosion from Bakugo had managed to carry them halfway to the exit. He could feel the recoil from using all of that power, and his arm was absolutely shot. Just then, the two boys would see that All Might was coming after them. Deku would then look back to Bakugo, and he would tell him that he needed to get out of here. Bakugo then asked what on earth was he going to do, and Izuku explained that he was going to hold All Might back here and now, and he was going to stand his ground. Bakugo looked at him like an idiot. He knew he didn't have that type of power. There was no way they were going to be able to stop him. But Izuku simply yelled at his friend, telling him that he could handle it and that he just needed to trust him. With hesitation, Bakugo would nod, but he would give him the other gauntlet. He would tell him that it had one charge if he pulled the pin, and that if he needed to use it, then use it quickly. Deku would nod as he slipped the gauntlet onto his hand and got into his stance, waiting as All Might went flying towards him. Deku would then focus his chakra into his feet. As he did so, he would feel his chakra beginning to radiate all through his body. At a young age, Izuku knew that he had the affinity for lightning release, and he knew that he could release it from his body in small dosage. He wondered if now he could draw on that power. As he focused and concentrated, small crackles of green lightning would start to shoot all throughout his body. As it did so, and All Might got close, Izuku would then open up the third gate. The moment All Might got close, Izuku would take the pin out of the gauntlet and throw his hand onto the ground, waiting for the explosion to occur. And thankfully, the timing was perfect. As the explosion came, Izuku would go flying from up on the ground, his legs sticking straight up, as he kicked All Might directly in the jaw, sending him flying straight into the air. But Izuku wasn't done. With the gauntlet now completely destroyed and wrecked, Izuku would go flying up behind All Might. He would get behind him using the dancing leaf shadow, as the bandages from his arm would begin to wrap all around All Might all at once. All Might had remembered this technique long ago, but he could feel that his power was starting to wane and run out, as steam started to bellow from his body and he began to cough up some blood. So, that technique, young Izuku. Yep, just like the one my father taught me. It seems as though this is going to be your last attack. Will you make it count, young hero? I will! Now! Third gate, Gate of Life, open! Primary Lotus! Izuku's skin would turn bright red, his eyes beginning to glow, as he and All Might went rocketing straight down. However, All Might had managed to get his hand free, and he would cock his arm back. As he and Izuku were about to hit the ground at once, All Might would give everything he had as he yelled out, "Detroit! Smash!" The two powers would collide with the ground all at once, the shockwaves blasting Bakugo as he went flying directly towards the exit. He wasn't able to stop or control himself, but he managed to get through, with just enough time to spare. Even so, as he crashed to the ground, the shockwaves could be felt for miles, the dust and the debris flying straight into the air itself. No one on the monitors could see what had happened. Even Mr. Aizawa and the other teachers had gotten rather nervous. They had called in for a medical to go and pick them up and check on them immediately. And with that, Recovery Girl and the others were sent to go and pick up the teacher and student immediately. However, when they arrived, they would see that All Might and Izuku were both laid out, each of them in respective craters, both completely unconscious. As for Todoroki, he was extremely taxed. It seemed as though he had overheated and his body had suffered from flash freeze. The students would all be taken to the infirmary to have their wounds checked on, and Recovery Girl would give them all a scolding. All Might for going so hard against children, and the three boys for putting themselves in such reckless situations. She would then shake her head at Izuku of all people, because she remembered his father back in the day, and how he would always put his body through so much pain and agony for no reason. That power, as incredible as it might have been, it was truly the double-edged sword. Just seeing that his muscle fibers were almost torn to shreds, the ligaments, everything. She would warn him to be very careful with that power. As great as it was like a poison that would slowly sap away at one's own quality of life. Izuku would take this to heart, and the others would all take their time to recover. Along with All Might, Bakugo would then be filled in on everything else, since he already knew everything from the beginning anyway. And All Might was fine with young Bakugo knowing, as he felt as though he were someone that he could trust. And with that, he now had 3 young wards in his care: Bakugo, Izuku, and Todoroki. 3 young promising heroes, all of whom he felt could vie for the title of #1 someday. And knowing this fact comforted him. Even in an age where the old heroes would soon come to pass, there would be a new age of heroes who would rise up and lead this world into the future. This concludes What If Deku Was the Son of Rock Lee? My Hero Academia Fighting Spirit Part 6. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video, as we are going to be continuing Darling in the Franxx Lionhearted, Darling in the Franxx crossover Voltron Legendary Defender Part 6. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.